What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Primetime Podcast. My name is Justin, and I want to welcome you all to Primetime 21st Gaming. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube or follow me on Twitch, but my main channel is YouTube, so definitely check me out on there. You'll find reviews, gameplay, and, of course, the Primetime Podcast. Now, today, I am doing the podcast live on Twitch, somewhat of an experiment. I've got some people in here. I'm going to answer a few questions on the day's topic. And today's topic is the death of Sega. We're going to talk about the company that was once a juggernaut in the video game industry and has fallen off. And I mean, they're still around, and we'll talk about all of that once we get there. But definitely check out, though, the past podcasts. You can go on YouTube and look under my playlist. It has its own playlist, the Primetime Podcast. Episode 1, I talked about the Tomb Raider franchise. Episode 2, I covered Nintendo 64 versus PlayStation 1. And then Episode 3 was talking about Xbox consoles with my buddy Dion. So definitely check those out. But today, it's the death of Sega. Alright, so let's start a little bit with Sega today. They're still making games, and Sonic Mania had just come out not too long ago, and I had got it for PlayStation 4, and I thought, honestly, it was an incredible game. I did. I thought it was certainly challenging, and it definitely had that old school feel to it. It was old school Sonic, but, just a newer, and it was a new game. It's a really good game, so Sega is still out there making games, and then of course we still have, they do like the little Genesis that you can like a plug and play right into the TV, and there's like games already preloaded, somewhat like an NES Classic or a SNES Classic, something like that. But there's so many out there, it's not even funny. But I know recently they did one where they dropped the yellow and white cable hookup, and now you can hook it up HD. But anyway, Sega's still out there, but they're nowhere near what they used to be. And we're going to talk about the death of Sega. And I think the best part, or the best way to start it, is towards the end of the Genesis run. Everyone knows that the Genesis was, Nintendo's biggest competitor. Sega, of course, Nintendo's biggest competitor. But the Genesis, always was marketed towards the older kids, and made Nintendo look like the little children's console, which is not true at all. If you've advanced a little bit and move on to Nintendo 64, which I talked about a couple episodes ago, Ocarina of Time is no ways near a kid's game. I actually played through it for the first time, completely played through it, and that is a challenging game in my opinion. But we're not here talking about Nintendo. We're getting started with Sega. So the end of the Genesis, they were trying to milk it. They were trying to get whatever they could out of it there towards the end. And Atari had just released the Jaguar in 1993 and was claiming it to be a 64-bit console. So you be the judge if it was a 64-bit console or not. I have a hard time believing it is, especially if you're looking at games like Cybermorph and stuff. It just doesn't, I don't see it. But anyway, Sega released an add-on for the Genesis called the 32X in 1994. It was a mushroom-shaped little add-on that connected to the Genesis by the cartridge slot, turning it from a 16-bit console to a 32. But the starting price for the 32X was a little pricey. At least around that time, anyway. And the add-on was around $160. But here was the thing: why would you pay $160 when it only had 3 games available at launch? You know what I mean? Like, you just wouldn't. The games looked rushed because they were, and the sales dropped drastically. And eventually, the add-on dropped to like $20. So. I did not have a 32X. I see someone in the chat asking if I had the Sega CD or a 32X. I did not. I didn't have either or. I just had the Genesis, and I was always late to the next biggest console. Like I had an NES growing up, and then went to a Genesis, and then straight to a PlayStation. Like I and by the I mean I had a Genesis, and the PlayStation 1 was already out. I didn't get to the PlayStation 1 till towards the end, but anyway, the Sega Saturn released in 1994 in Japan, 2 weeks before the PlayStation 1 released, and even with that head start that the Saturn had, the PlayStation 1 was starting to outsell it in Japan. So Sega of Japan started getting nervous and told Sega of America to release the Saturn in North America 4 months early. So go to E3 in 1995, and the Sega Saturn was previewed, and at the end of their presentation, it was surprisingly announced that it would be available immediately at a jaw-dropping price of $399. Now you may think that's nothing compared to, gaming consoles today. That's not bad, but at that time, yes, that was expensive. And anyway, being as savage as Sony was at that time, the E3 moment, it is known as the price heard around the world. After the PlayStation 1 was previewed, Sony Computer Entertainment of America's president ditched his speech and said $299 and sat down immediately, and the crowd erupted. So they're telling, everyone, they basically buried Sega right then and there. They're like, okay, well, here's what you've presented to us for that high of a price. Here's what we're offering for cheaper. So the Saturn then had promised to have 20 launch titles, but ended up with just 6. That is a huge difference. That's a huge difference. It's not like, hey, we're going to have 20 titles at launch. Oh, you know what? We couldn't make it happen. Here's 15. No. 20 and ended up with 6. Can you imagine, like, 20 launch titles today? But, I mean, that... It kind of seems out there. You know what I mean? I think, like, the Switch only had... Oh, geez, I could be so off. But I want to think the Switch only had, like, maybe 4 or something. And the 64 didn't have a lot when it came out either. So, but anyway, that was just a promise that was not kept. But so the 4-month head start sold about 80,000 units for the Saturn. But when the PlayStation 1 released in September that year, it took them just 2 days to reach 100,000. That's insane. That's insane. It just shows you, the price is a huge, and I mean I have a Saturn. I didn't have a Saturn growing up, but I don't know. To me, I just think the PlayStation 1 was a much better console than the Saturn. But that's just my opinion. You may have a completely different opinion than I do. But that's just me. But the Saturn was discontinued in 1998. So it didn't, from 95 to 98, it just... That seems short to me. That just seems like a short, time frame for a console to be discontinued. So then the Dreamcast released in 1999. Everyone remembers the commercials, $99.99. Okay? That was the release of the Saturn. It seemed very impressive, and it did well in North America, selling 500,000 units in 2 weeks. Had online connectivity, some good games to launch with, and with all that success, Sega kept hearing rumbling of the PS2, and how much more impressive it would be including a built-in DVD player. This is the future. We're moving on. And even though, like I said, the Dreamcast was going to have, online connectivity, we're moving out of the VHS era into the DVDs. You know what I mean? And the fact that, I think, also, going back to the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 1 was a CD player. Like, you could put in a CD, and some people say that the original PlayStation, the sound, the stereo, like the sound of it was incredible. But I don't know. I didn't look into it that much. I honestly didn't use my PlayStation a lot as a CD player, but I did use my PS2 as a DVD player. It's a 2-in-1, and DVD players were expensive back then. They're pretty cheap now. Everything's all Blu-ray. But anyway, it had a built-in DVD player, and the PS2 was a powerful console. and it sold very well on release. In Japan, day one, they sold 600,000 units compared to the Dreamcast selling just 500,000 in 2 weeks in North America. So during that holiday season in 2000, the Dreamcast once again started selling very well due to the part shortages in Japan for the PS2, and that held them up for shipping to North America. But it didn't last long, and Sega threw in the towel and discontinued the Dreamcast early 2001. You know, it's kind of crazy to think when you look back and you think the rival was always Nintendo versus Sega, but in the end it was Sony that, or well, the PS2 alone drove the dagger in, and third-party developers like EA wouldn't even work with them because of the failures of the Saturn. You know, you could look back and think, well, what if the Saturn wasn't as expensive? I don't even know if that would have been, enough to keep them around, or maybe it would have kept them around a little longer. But I just think people lost their trust with Sega, and like I said, the 1995 the Saturn was released, and by 98 it was discontinued. A year later, 99, the Dreamcast is already coming out. So those people who spent money on the Saturn just a few years ago are going to have to spend a good bit of change to get the new console. And then the PS2 on top of that, you get a DVD player. It was just the better option. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a bundle. It's like a bundle deal. Why wouldn't you? So, I mean, the Dreamcast is definitely it was definitely ahead of its time. And I never had one growing up. I have one now, and I can tell you, I actually like to sit down and play some Sega Dreamcast. I didn't care much for the Saturn. I still don't care much for the Saturn. I do like the Saturn cases, but that's about it. But the Sega Dreamcast was a console that I just think, due to the failures of the Saturn, it wasn't able to get the recognition that it probably deserved. So, but anyway, let's get to some questions here. We've got Robert Barnett said, "Did you ever buy a Sega console on release day?" I never did. No, I never did. I was growing up, I was always a PlayStation kid. I had to, from the, other than my NES, that was basically, it was just always there for me. I did get a Sega Genesis, but not until like 98, something like that. And then I got the PlayStation 1 in 99, and I didn't look back from there. I got a PS2 and stuff like that. But no, I never got a Sega console on release day. My uncle, however, ended up getting the Dreamcast when it came out in 99. And I remember he was pretty excited for that build up 9999. So, but no, I didn't. All right, here we go. We got Mariah 381. If the Saturn were to start a lower price, do you think Sony's PS1 would have had more competition with them? And I just kind of covered that a little bit. I honestly think eventually I don't think the price would have mattered, truthfully. I don't, because the PlayStation 1 just had so much more to offer than the Saturn did. And maybe if the Saturn was let's see, the PlayStation started at $299. So if the Saturn was maybe, I don't know, I would want to say $199, but that's a little cheap for a new console. I don't know. I just think the PlayStation, I don't think they really stood a chance against Sony's PlayStation. Cody Binder, I think I may be the only one who wanted Sega to outlast Nintendo. That war went the wrong way, in my opinion. Do you agree? I'd have to disagree. And I'm not like a I'm not like a Nintendo fanboy or anything like that. I love Nintendo. I love Sony. I love them all. You know, I love Xbox, and I love Sega as well. And you know, I think the one thing I loved about Sega the most was, like, especially the Genesis, was the music. You know, you had the synthesizer style music, and I liked that more than I, you know, really cared for the Nintendo music. I mean, yes, I love classic Mario, the Mario theme, the Zelda theme, and stuff like that, but that synthesizer music was pretty cool. But I don't know. I mean, honestly, I kind of wish that Sega was still making consoles. I really do. But I mean, if that's your opinion, you think it went the wrong way. I think it went. I'm kind of torn because I'm like, I kind of wish, you know, like I said, I kind of wish Sega was still making consoles. So, but Nintendo definitely lost a battle as well there for a little bit. You know, losing to Sony with sales. You know, Sony beating them, the Nintendo 64 with their PS1, and then the PS2 beating out the GameCube. And Nintendo really wouldn't pick up any speed until the Wii. But yeah, I think, you know, Sega's still out there, and there's rumor going around. It's been going around for the past, oh god, probably 10 years. Sega's going to get back into the console market, and I just don't see it. I just don't see them making consoles anymore, you know. But all right, let's see. We got another one here. If Sony and Nintendo worked out a deal back in the day, do you think Sega would still be making consoles? Possibly. Yes, that's a good question, because you got to think the PlayStation wouldn't be around. You know, Sony would be just partnered up with Nintendo, but it's kind of hard to tell. You know, who knows? Would you buy a new Sega console if they were to release in the future? I probably would, depending on the price. I would hope they'd be a little smart about it. But then again, look at console prices today. That $399 is nothing compared to today. You know, I think the Xbox One and PS4 started out at $500, I believe. Or maybe the PlayStation 4 was $400. I'm not sure. I know when I bought my Xbox it was $500, the Xbox One. But yeah, those prices, they're nothing, you know. And it's weird because video game prices back in the day were more than they are today. I mean, not counting the DLC bull crap, but heck, you could buy the video game 3 times by the time you buy all the DLC for a game. But that's a whole nother podcast. Am I the only one that thinks Xbox copied the controller design for the Dreamcast? It's very similar, like with the buttons and the color scheme, or the color of the buttons and stuff. It is very similar, but I've heard that before. I've definitely heard that before. What's your favorite Sega console? It's definitely between the Genesis and the Dreamcast. Like I said, I didn't care a whole lot for the Saturn, and the Master System was way before my time. And I always had, like I said, I grew up with an NES, so I'd have to go with the Genesis, or probably the Genesis. I have more memories with the Genesis than I would of the Saturn. So, but all right, guys, that's gonna do it. You know, just not a very long podcast. Just pretty much cover what I thought, anyway, was the death of Sega. And when I look back at it, just business decisions. You know what I mean? It's just Sega pretty much buried themselves, and Sony was there, like I said, to drive that final dagger in to make sure they were completely finished off. But that's it, guys. That is the death of Sega. Once again, I want to thank everybody who came in and watched this live, and I appreciate the questions. And those of you who are watching it later, once it has been uploaded to YouTube, be sure to subscribe to Primetime 21st Gaming on YouTube. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitch. I'm not on there as much as I am on YouTube, but you can catch me on there once in a while. But definitely check out YouTube. I do gameplay, reviews, and of course the Primetime podcast. So who knows what the next episode will be, but there definitely will be some more Primetime podcast episodes. I try to do one a month, so definitely check them out. And that's going to do it for me, guys. My name is Justin. This is the Primetime podcast, and I'm signing off.